Today we finished our first assignment, fantastic. We're going to be moving on to theories of mind. We'll talk a bit about today. And then for the rest of the term, it's going to be a little bit disparate because I want to expose you to some different ideas. That's going to help you with your next assignment, which we're going to start today. And we'll have the draft due for that just before we go on holidays. And then we can spend a bit of time early next term working on it as well. So theories of mind, we're talking about what is consciousness? Okay, that's what it is. It's those kinds of questions. Are we just a bag of skin, pieces of matter, or do we have some sort of intangible spirit or soul that is immaterial, but that inhabits the machine that is our body? So here's the four theories that we are going to investigate. Okay, so we've got interactionism. That's what it's referred to in this image. We're going to call it dualism, which says there's two substances. There's the physical world, the material world, and the immaterial world, okay, the spiritual world. There's materialism, which says brain identity theory is another word for that, that every thought you have is just atoms in the brain, okay, simples interacting with one another, that every qualitative experience is just something physical, that there's no problem. Epiphenomenalism, which says mind, okay, and thoughts and experiences are a product of matter, and mind has no influence on the physical world, but the physical world affects the mind. All right, and then idealism, which says there's no physical world, it's just an idea, a projection from a mind. All right, so they're the four main theories. So when we think about materialism, that's probably the dominant view in philosophy. And that stems from, I think, science, okay? From the empirical sciences, we look at how much success science has had by just focusing on the material world, all right? All of the excellent things we have are a product of that method, aren't they? So here we go. Here's an argument for materialism. We have P1, the brain is identical to the mind. Okay, that they're the same thing. The brain is made of atoms, therefore the mind is made of atoms. Okay, so distinction between brain and mind. Brain is that physical thing inside your head. Mind is that which experiences, okay, that which thinks, that which deliberates, that which feels. That's what your mind is. So, let's talk about it. Premise one, any thoughts? Is the brain and the mind the same thing? Dunno. They haven't provided any arguments for it here. They've just made it as an assertion.
Yeah.
So that might be something we need to think about. Yeah.
If the mind's intangible, like they say, then how can we know that it's identical to the brain?
Yeah. So from brain identity theory, they would say the mind is not immaterial. The mind is just the brain. When you speak of the mind, you just mean the brain. Right, that's their claim, that they're the same. The second premise, probably not really willing to take that one on. You just say, if all physical things are made of some simple, let's just say it's atoms, then we'd be pretty happy to accept that. But the first one, you'd probably be pretty willing to contest. What evidence do you have that the mind and the brain are just the same thing? So you can experience pain, and you can scan someone's brain and see the areas that light up and the electricity that's pulsing through the neurons, but you can't see the experience of that they're undergoing. So we're presented with the hard problem of consciousness. Okay, so this is a problem for materialism, and it's just that: is how can a bunch of atoms, a bunch of simples, have some quality about them? So for instance, when we talk about people, we often describe people as good. Oh yeah, he's a good bloke. Oh yeah, she's a nice person. All right. How can a bunch of atoms be good? All right, or true? All right. So if I have the belief that today is the 31st of February, all right, that's a false belief, isn't it? Because it can never be the 31st of February. But if I have a belief, that's, according to brain identity theory, that's a state of atoms. They're arranged in a certain way in my brain. How can a state of atoms arranged in a certain way be true or be false? How can that state of atoms be false? How can they love? You know, if I experience love for my wife and for my family, that's, according to brain identity theory, just a bunch of atoms. How can that state of atoms describe that qualitative experience? The same with deliberating, that is thinking hard about what cause of action to take. How can a state of atoms make a choice? Maybe we can't make choices. Okay? And that's the hard determinist claim, isn't it? Is if we are just atoms, then there is no choice. That our choices are an illusion, they're a product of atoms in the void. So, hard problem of consciousness. Billy, could you read that for me?
The hard problem of consciousness is the problem of explaining how and why sentient organisms have qualia or phenomenal experiences, how and why it is that some internal states are felt states such as heat or pain, rather than unfelt states, as in the thermostat or a hot water heater.
Excellent. So that's what qualia is it's a sense experience. So qualia is the plural, that means sense experiences. The singular is qual, all right? That's a word we're going to use to describe a feeling, all right? Something that we sense. Or was there something else I needed to say about that? So this is a good example, isn't it? Okay, that we can feel the temperature in the room. I put the air conditioner on because I thought it was a bit hot. I'm drinking a hot coffee, so that might have an effect. All right, but I can feel the heat from the atmosphere. All right, that it's if we think of the atmosphere, invisible gas, oxygen, nitrogen, residual pieces of carbon. Okay, that they are conducting. Okay, they're transferring heat via conduction to my skin, and I'm sensing that, and I can feel that. It's a qualitative experience. Whereas a thermostat, okay, which picks up the temperature and turns on the air when it gets too hot, or turns on the heat when it gets too cold, all right, does it have any feeling of the temperature, or is it just detecting the amount of conductance of heat? It's just picking up how much the atoms are vibrating. That's what heat is. The more hot something is, the more vigorous the vibration. The colder something is, the stiller it becomes. All right, so is a thermostat, does it feel, it's a bit hot, let's put the air conditioner on? I think the argument's no, it's just picking up the vibration of molecules in the atmosphere. The same with a hot water heater, whose job is to heat water. Okay, so let's look at dualism then, and some arguments for it. And here's some really clear distinctions between what's meant by matter and what's meant by mind. So, Caitlin, would you like to read the first one for me?
Defined by such properties as length, depth, height, mass, motion, and spatial location, it is composed of purely physical parts, molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles, and governed entirely by the causal processes enshrined in the laws of physics. The body and the vast physical universe of which it is a part are best thought of through the model of a machine, their operation being as mechanically automatic as those of a watch, and their elements as brute and unthinking as a watch's gears and mainspring.
Excellent. So I think very clear, it's talking about things that occupy space, that are made of something physical, and that follow the laws of nature. That's what it's saying. That's what it means for something to be material. All right, Michael, what about mind?
The mind, by contrast, is essentially a thinking thing devoid of shape, mass, location in space, or any other physical property, and governed by reason rather than mechanical causation. It is as utterly distinct from its associated human body as it is from the material world in general, though it does not interact with it.
Excellent. So very clear. It's a distinct substance. It's a separate thing. That we have the material world and then we have this sort of immaterial world, and this is a thinking thing. Okay, so let's look at a couple of arguments for dualism. So Nat, can you read that argument for me?
For two things to be the same thing, they must have exactly the same properties. My brain can be cut in half. My mind cannot be cut in half. My brain is not my mind.
Right. What do we think about this? All right, is the first premise true? For two things to be the same, they must have the same properties. All right, that's what we would say is identical. They must have exactly the same properties, so the same, made of the same thing in the same location, with the same characteristics. All right. What about the second premise? My brain can be cut in half. All right. Yeah, you could get a hacksaw or a chainsaw or a lightsaber and chop my brain in half. Okay. What about my mind? My mind cannot be cut in half.
It just kind of says that the mind is different from the brain, and like if someone thinks that the brain and the mind are the same thing, then they'd surely say it can be.
Absolutely.
So it's not
Yep.
really giving an argument there, it's just kind of saying it.
Very good. Yep. So this is the fallacy of begging the question, isn't it? It's assuming what it's trying to prove. They're saying my mind can't be cut, but my brain can, so therefore they're different. All right. So they would need to provide evidence that their mind cannot be cut in half. Okay. So how about this? How about this for some evidence for it? Okay. I mean, you can put the brain on a table. You can cut it in half. Okay. And then you would have two halves of a brain. Right? What would it mean to cut a mind in half? Cut someone's personality in half? Would you then have two separate personalities or two half personalities, or they're just sort of pointing out some problem, aren't they? And they've offered a solution and they're saying this is the solution, but they're saying here's a problem. Any other thoughts? Yeah, but really good point. Begging the question against the first one. Okay, what about this one? Follows a similar chain of thought. Mercedes.
For two things to be the same thing, all statements that are true for one must also be true for the other. I can know with certainty that my mind exists. I cannot know with certainty that my brain exists. Therefore, my brain and my mind cannot be the same thing.
Okay, so this one's a bit more powerful, isn't it? Okay, so it maintains the same first premise, all right, just about identity. Premise 2, I can know with certainty that my mind exists. That thoughts are occurring, that I am a thinking thing. Whether I'm in a simulation or a brain in a vat, thoughts are occurring and I am thinking. So by definition, a mind is a thinking thing, so it exists. But I don't know with certainty that my brain exists. All right? Because it could be I'm just an idea floating in the void. Well, it could be just a mind floating in the void. Maybe I'm actually a grain of sand with a thought that thinks it has a brain. So anyone willing to contest either of those two premises, or any thoughts about it?
If you're just a brain that exists nowhere, right? How can a brain think of a world and then think of something that it doesn't understand? Like, if someone says something and I got no idea what they're on about, how can a brain think up something that it itself cannot understand?
So a brain has to have full comprehension of,
like
of what's going on. Yep.
if I'm imagining this world and then he says something absolutely nuts that I don't get, how can I think of something that I don't understand?
Sure. And like maybe one answer to that is like, think about how complex your body is, right? You don't control your heartbeat, and it's a good thing because you might forget to get your heart to beat and then you might just die. All right. Most of the time you don't control your breathing. Okay, but now that I've said it, you're manually breathing. You're welcome. Which is so painful, by the way, isn't it? It's manually breathing. So, like all of the time, there are things that are happening that our brain or our sort of our neural system controls that we don't even have to think about. So there's lots less awareness of our world than our body knows. Our body seems to know more and to manage more than we do. What about this for this argument? It says, I know with certainty that my mind exists, but I cannot know with certainty that my brain exists. So it's saying, you know, I have knowledge about one thing, but I don't have knowledge about the other thing. That's just a lack of knowledge, isn't it? It could be if we found some knowledge that confirmed or disconfirmed, then the conclusion would be maintained. But all that means is we don't have enough knowledge to know that they're the same. Is it again begging the question or not?
Look, I think it is, because they're kind of, like, again, if you didn't believe that, then you'd just say that, like, no, I also know for certainty that my mind doesn't exist because it's just my brain.
Yep.
So it just kind of assumes again that they're different.
Okay, and the next argument's even weaker. Okay, but it makes a strong point. It's about what's conceivable. Okay, so we'll read through it in a sec, but let's just get you guys to think about what does it mean for something to be conceivable? It means for it to be possible. And some of you have already talked about possible worlds theory. Okay, possible worlds. And basically, we can think about our world, and our world has certain constraints, right? We have certain universal laws. We think about our Earth here, and the sky is blue, all right? But it could be, there's a possible world where the sky is red, isn't there? If the atmosphere is made of methane, then the sky would be red. The reason it's blue is because it's predominantly nitrogen, widely scattering. So there's a possible world where it's red, all right? But in this possible world, okay, and we could even say, right, we think of the size of planet Earth, we could say, in this other possible world, the sky is red and the planet is this big, okay? So if the planet's smaller, it has less mass, what does that mean for gravity? Is gravity going to be stronger on it or weaker on it? Weaker. It's going to be weaker, right? So the more mass something has, the more gravity it has. That's like Jupiter. Jupiter has the strongest gravitation. Well, that's why all of the planets are going around the sun, because the sun has the strongest gravitation. Okay, so that means on this planet, on this possible world, the gravitational pull is weaker. All right, which means if you were to go there and see the red sky, and you were to jump up into the air, would you jump higher or would you struggle to get off the ground? What would happen if you went there with your body position? You'd jump way higher. You've seen the footage of the astronauts on the moon. Okay, they jump. They're like flying. They can launch themselves up into space. So we've got this possible world, right? Okay. Now in our world, all right, 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, this is a mathematical truth, isn't it? It's a necessary statement. Okay, in this possible world, is it possible for 2 + 2 to = 5? All right. What do we reckon? Is this a possible reality? We can have a red sky and a small planet where you fly around. Okay, so we can have these different physical possibilities. Is it possible to have these different abstract truths?
Depends on what they're called for.
Depends on what they call for. Yeah, okay, so let's ignore the symbol, all right, and speak about the meaning of that statement. Is it possible for this statement to maintain the equality to that? So regardless of the symbols, I'm talking about, is it possible to take 2 things and another 2 things and add them together and have 5 things?
Well, surely if the maths changed, then the gravity would change as well, right? Because physics and maths.
Your physics and maths are connected, yeah. So we're not changing maths. I'm saying it's possible to have a world, and it's possible to have low gravity and to have a red sky. Is it possible for this statement to be true? Okay, so anyway, the argument from conceivability says no, it's not. Okay, there are things that are metaphysically true in all worlds. Okay, so they tend to be statements that are mathematical. All right, it tends to be stuff like pi is 3.14 with the infinite number of decimals. The reason being, it doesn't matter the conditions of the universe you're in. The circumference divided by the diameter is always 3.14. It doesn't matter if the sky is red and the planet has lowest gravity. That doesn't affect these mathematical truths, that they transcend all physical possible ways the world can be. So they say there are things that are metaphysically true. All right? And so if something is conceivable, if you can imagine it, then it's possible. That's what it means for it to be conceivable. If you can imagine it's true, then it's possible for it to be true. All right. So we can imagine 2 + 2 is 4. You can make that statement, but you can't see how it can be rational and coherent. All right. So that's how they're deriving the first premise anyway, and you're welcome to contest it. That which is metaphysically possible is that which is conceivable. Okay? If you can conceive it, then it's possible in some possible world. That's the first premise. The second premise, it is conceivable for my mind to exist without my brain. Okay? And so in the argument when you're reading this, okay, what I want you to do I like the vampire there in the mirror, is picture yourself staring in the mirror at yourself, okay? First thing, imagine yourself without any clothes on, but you're staring at yourself. Now, imagine yourself without any skin. Okay, so you don't have skin, you're staring at you can see your muscles in the reflection. Okay. Now imagine yourself without any muscles. Okay, so now you don't have any muscles. You've got some organs, you can see your liver and stuff, and you can see your skeleton, your bones. Okay. Now imagine yourself without any organs. Okay, so now you're basically just a skeleton. You've got no skin, you've got no muscle, you've got no organs, you're just a skeleton, and you can imagine staring at a skeleton in the mirror. Okay. Now imagine there's no skeleton. Okay, so imagine you're staring in the mirror and you're seeing nothing. Alright, a little bit like the vampire here. Okay, he's staring in the mirror, he's seeing the woman and the reflection of the group, but he's not seeing himself. Okay, so you can conceive of, it's possible for you to stare into the mirror and not see anything reflected. Okay? It's possible. So that's saying it's metaphysically possible for you to exist without a body. It's not saying that's the case, it's just saying it's possible that this could be true. Okay, but dualism presents its own problems, doesn't it? So one of them is the interaction problem. So the interaction problem is obviously, right, obviously the physical world affects the mind, okay? If you drink alcohol, if you drink too much alcohol, you get drunk, you feel the effects of it in your mind, okay? You lose the ability to reason. If you've got a headache, you can take some Panadol, all right, and it can make the pain go away. So we have these physical things can affect the qualia we have, all right? That's obviously true, all right? And perhaps the opposite is true as well, okay? If you believe that we have free will, then you would believe that your thoughts and your deliberation can affect what decisions you make, all right? But we have this interaction problem. Is if the mind is something that is spiritual, how does something that is spiritual interact with something that is physical? So we can easily consider a line of dominoes, right? Involved in a course of action. You know, domino 1 falls, hits domino 2, hits domino 3, okay? But if you're to make a decision, if I'm to make a decision to write on the whiteboard, okay, how is this spiritual mind, okay, this immaterial domino, so to speak, impacting this physical domino? That's the interaction problem. How does what is immaterial affect what is material? So I think this is pretty cool. So this is from a book on metaphysics, and he's talking about if you're walking along, you see a tiger, all right? You see a tiger, we like tigers, but you get a bit scared because you know you don't have a gun and you're in the bush and it's going to get you, all right? So when you see a tiger, like this is how you could describe it simply. There's your eyes see the tiger, your mind understands what that tiger means, and you start sweating, you start perspirating. All right, this tiger's going to eat me. You feel fear inside of you. That's what happens when you see a tiger. So we have, observation, qualia, and then maybe some response. I'm going to run in the opposite direction. Okay. So have a read of this about what the physical processes involved in perspirating. All right. I'm going to read this quickly. Perspiration, everyone knows, is secreted by tiny complex glands in the skin. They are caused to secrete this substance not by any mind acting on them, but by the contraction of little unstratiated muscles. These tiny muscles are composed of numerous minute cells, wherein occur chemical reactions of the most baffling complexity. It is believed, however, that the energy required for the activity is derived from the oxidation of fatty acids, or perhaps acetate. Their contraction in any case generates an electrical current of small but measurable amounts. It might be supposed that these muscles are inverted by the mind, which is, by some mysterious alchemy, produced chemical reactions within their cells. But this, even if it makes any sense, is certainly not true. The muscles are activated by hormones produced by the adrenal medulla in response to impulses of the autonomic nervous system, probably by the hormones epinephrine or non-epinephrine, or more likely in the present case by an epinephrine-like substance that is produced in minute quantities by adrenergic fibers, that is certain post-ganglionic neurons of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, that's about a quarter of the process. It keeps going. Where this substance comes from, it's apparently not known, but it cannot be doubted that it is a physical substance. Indeed, its chemical formula is known, and it can be synthesized in the body and in a lab. It has, in any case, no mental or extra-physical origin. It is the activity of the neurons of the sympathetic nervous system that leads to the production of this epinephrine-like substance by the adrenergic fibers. How impulses are propagated by these neurons is also not entirely understood, but it seems to be somewhat as follows. Okay, here's the exciting part. Stimulation of neuron increases the permeability of the neuron membrane, causing a diffusion of sodium ions into the neuron itself, so that the neuron within becomes positively charged with respect to the outside, with a resultant flow of current. Such currents are easily detected and fairly accurately measured by a physiologist. The diffused fibers of the sympathetic nervous system coalesce and center about two chains of ganglia that are arranged along the sides of the spinal cord. Unlike the neurons of the parasympathetic nervous system, those of the sympathetic nervous system synapse near the ganglia. The nerve impulse is transmitted across the synapse by the help of acetylcholine, a fairly well-known substance that is believed to be produced by the terminal fibrous of the nerves. The cells of the spinal ganglia are supplied by preganglionic neuron fibers arising from... Okay, I think you get the point. All right, and we're almost done. And this is, then read this at the bottom. Such is the barest outline of something of the chemistry and physics involved in emotional perspiration. Okay, and anyway, one of the points at the end is like this: we still don't know where some of these things come from, or what they do, or how they develop. But we can think of how many dominoes there are here. All right, is the first one? It's just a physical domino. Okay, so one of the opening theories of mine was about epiphenomenalism. Okay, and this gains a bit of traction, and it says, matter produces mind, that everything you experience is a product of matter, but that the mind and the will have no power to change the physical body. All right, that every desire you have, okay, comes after your body is already in the motion of performing that action, and that you believe you're justified in doing so because they're so closely tied together. Consciousness is post hoc, after the fact. Okay, consciousness occurs after the material reaction. All right, so that's epiphenomenalism, and we will look a bit more at that when we look at determinism. Okay. What about this one, like idealism? So we will, when we talk about epistemology in term 3, we'll study this guy a bit, who his name is Bishop Berkeley, although it's spelled Berkeley. He says, it seems we have far more warrant for believing in mind than we do in matter. For all experience is experience localized within the mind. All right, what's more fundamental, your thoughts or the physical world? Because it seems every experience of the physical world itself is a thought, is a sense. So this is the problem he raises, and maybe you've heard this before, but he says, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? All right, and if you're a materialist, you'd say, yes, obviously it makes a sound. For it to make a sound doesn't depend on someone observing it. But that's the claim of idealism, that if all things are ideas, things only exist when they are being thought about, when they're being observed. And so, if it's all an idea and there is no physical world and it's just a product of mind, all right, whether it be you guys are a product of my mind or I'm a product of your mind, and that you're producing, or maybe we're all products of the mind of God, we're all just disembodied ideas, or girls, or maybe like that of solipsism, Okay, that you're the only person that exists, that you're the only idea that exists, and everything else is a projection, a creation of your mind. So, what we'll do, we're going to, I think before we answer this, we're going to read through something together. Okay, and I haven't printed it. I thought let's just read the online version of it. So if you can pull your laptops out, and we'll go to the sector page for today's lesson.